I was wondering if we could start off and just ask you this question. When you were growing up in Switzerland in the 70s, did you ever imagine that you would be doing what you're doing now, running the School of Life, you know, giving lectures all over the world and talking about these concepts? Was that in your brain or not?
Look, I think that the attitudes that I bring to my work now, I like to feel might have been present in the 7-8-year-old me. As a kid, I loved creativity. That meant at the time the tools I had were Lego, some paints, you know, some exercise books. So I would write, I would draw, I would build worlds. And I loved, you know, the technology we had then. I liked to take things apart, etc. And in many ways, work continues to be an extension of play. And the embarrassing thing is that I enjoy my job so much, it's better than going on holiday. And that's in a way the definition of the kind of work that you want. You want the kind of work that if you didn't have to do it, you'd want to do it anyway. And I was a dutiful student when I went to school and then university. I wanted to please my parents and tick all the boxes. But I also knew that if you did that your whole life long, that would be equivalent to being dead. That you know, there's a time for submitting to authority and for complying, but there is also a time for strategic rebellion. And I knew that in my bones. I knew that I didn't want to lead a life that was inwardly dead. And because I went to school from a very young age in a pretty tough English boarding school from the age of 8, kind of military establishment, really.
The School of Dragons?
Yeah.
Dragon School.
Dragon School.
I've never heard of this.
I know.
Can you educate us on what this is? The Americans are going to love this because it feels very Harry Potter-ish.
Yeah, well, the British, you know, believe, partly because of their days of empire, that it's useful for a child to be separated from its parents around the age of 6, 7, 8, and to essentially build up a new identity among a group of your peers, play a lot of football, rugby in all weathers, eat thin and undernourishing food, and essentially suffer so that it prepares you to rule over the Congo, parts of Kenya, maybe new universes not yet discovered by Her Majesty's gunboats. Of course, by 1979, this was a hugely outdated ambition, and indeed the whole system is completely crazy. And
was that intentional of that system?
And deserves.
To build up those warriors.
Yes, absolutely. It was absolutely intentional, but completely outdated. So as an adult, I've become, well, you know, it's interesting. One of the things that I'm fascinated by is attachment theory. And attachment theory as a theory was developed by the English psychologist John Bowlby, who had himself been to boarding school and experienced separation from parental love at a very young age, and realized that it messed him up, and it probably messed up lots of other people as well. And so the whole notion of how much you can trust once your basic trust, the trust that should have been built up in childhood, has been ruptured, you know, is alive at the heart of a lot of our studies of what makes relationships function and what you need to do in order to be somebody who can trust in adult love.
Okay.
So.
And what happened to you, do you think, at the School of Dragons or Dragon School? I mean, were there traumas there? Was there also any upside in that? Did you, I'm guessing you didn't send your children to one?
No, my children have been, you know, held very tightly to my bosom. Okay. And now they are themselves, as should happen, as teenagers, you know, drifting away. But it's that way around. You know, I've kept them as close as they need to be and let the rebellion come from them, as it should be. I mean, let's face it, you know, you don't want your kids spending their whole life at home. At some points, children have to grow disenchanted with their parents. But that should come at its own rhythm in this period of time that we call adolescence, and with a full sense that it's possible to regress. And I think what's interesting about a good adolescence is that it's compatible with regressive episodes where actually, you know, you dig out the old toys, you know, re-explore moments of childhood, but then, you know, you face outwards again and have a more adult life. And I think that sets a pattern for what it means to be an adult. I think what it means to be an adult is to be in touch with the child that you once were, that you can be again at selective moments. And, you know, to thread it back to English boarding schools, part of the problem of English boarding schools is that the atmosphere in them, certainly in my day, was a kind of hysteria against the childlike. So, you know, the last thing you wanted to be called was a mummy's boy. The last thing you wanted to do was to be found, you know, clutching your teddy bear, or have any weakness or sentimentality or fragility. These were extremely risky kind of modalities to adopt. And this runs counter to what an emotionally balanced life should be, which, as I say, is a kind of negotiated, constant re-encounter with the more childlike aspects of oneself.
Right. How did you deal with the boarding school?
So I coped. I learned how to cope. I was a good boy. I knew how to play the system and play my peers. But boy, oh boy, did I hate it inside. And I knew that this was going to be for a time and for a time only. And even now as an adult, I relish, in a way that perhaps others who haven't been through that system might not relish, my freedom. I love the ability to go where I like, when I like. And part of the reason why, when I finished my education, I didn't adopt a standard career path is I thought this feels too much like school. I didn't want to enter a regimented office culture that might, to me, have kind of re-evoked a very constrained life. So I knew that if I was going to be alive in the true sense, I needed to follow my passions and interests. And when I graduated, those passions or interests were predominantly psychological. You know, what fascinated me was how do I function emotionally, psychologically, and how do others function? And I wanted to try and put some flags on that territory, map that territory, and read as much as possible, talk to as many people to give me a sense of, look, broadly, the meaning of life. I mean, it sounds ridiculous.
It does kind of.
But, I was a kid who, at university, I would say to my friends, I'm looking for the meaning of life. And they were like, oh, this guy. And
you should go to California for that.
Yeah, but, in Britain, you know that you want to pull that off with a smile.
Right.
And, the worst sin in the UK is to take yourself too seriously, particularly as a so-called intellectual. But deep down, I was a very earnest quester after big answers to big questions. I wanted to know how to love, how to live, how to direct my energies, how society should be organized, what the place of art was, where philosophy should fit in, what an education system should be like, etc., etc. And I've had the great good fortune to build a life where I've systematically been able to explore these questions. But it took, I can't describe to you enough how frightened I was as a 21-year-old. My life was ahead of me. And I knew that I had to perform. I came from a high-performance family. I came from a family where people who were slacking and not doing very much were not tolerated. And I knew that there were pressures on me. But at the same time, I knew that adopting a more standard path in industry or commerce was not going to work for me. But I knew I had to tick some of those boxes. So I had a big challenge. I was under pressure as a 21-year-old. I wrote my first book when I was 22. Published when I was 23, and that, looking back, it was great and I enjoyed it and it was, I'm happy with that work, but it came from a lot of pressure and I wouldn't want other people to go through that pressure. I think that was, that was coming from a pretty dark place.